Good day, everyone. My name is Remay Picayo, and I am the second reporter for the topic Postmodern Approaches. So, my report focus on the narrative therapy. So, the topic outline of my reports are the proponents of narrative therapy, definition of narrative therapy, key concepts of narrative therapy, the therapeutic process, and lastly, the postmodern approaches from a multicultural perspective. The intended learning outcomes are understand the postmodern approaches, define what is narrative therapy, and know the concepts and the process of narrative therapy. So to start, of all the social constructionists, Michael White and David Epstein are best known for their use of narrative in therapy. According to White 1992, individuals construct the meaning of life and interpretative stories, which are then treated as truth because of the power of dominant culture narratives. Individuals tend to internalize the messages from these dominant discourses, which often work against the life opportunity of the individual. Adapting to postmodern narrative, social constructionist view sheds light on how power, knowledge, and truth are negotiated in families and other social and cultural contexts. Therapy is, in part, our establishment of personal agency from the oppression of external problems and the dominant stories of the larger system. So, what is narrative therapy? Narrative therapy seeks to be a respectful, non-blaming approach to counseling and community work which centers people as the experts in their own lives. It views problems as separate from people and assumes people have many skills, competencies, beliefs, values, commitments, and abilities that will assess them to reduce the influence of problems in their lives. So, what are the key concepts of narrative therapy? So, first, the key concept and therapeutic process sections are adapted by several different works, but primarily from these sources. So, it is according to Winslade and Mack 2007. So, the first concept of narrative therapy is focus, or the focus of narrative therapy. Therapists are encouraged to establish a collaborative approach with special interest in listening respectfully to client stories, to search for times in clients' lives when they were resourceful, to use questions as a way to engage clients and facilitate their exploration, to avoid diagnosing and labeling clients or accepting a totalizing description based on a problem, to assist clients in mapping the influence of a problem has had on their lives, and to assist clients in separating themselves from the dominant stories they have internalized so that space can be opened for the creation of alternative life stories. So, second is the rule of stories. We live our lives by stories we tell about ourselves and that others tell about us. These stories actually shape reality in that they construct and constitute what we see, feel, and do. The stories we live by grow out of conversations in a social and cultural context. Therapy clients do not assume the role of pathologized victims who are leading hopeless and pathetic lives. Rather, they emerge as courageous victors who have vivid stories to recount. The stories not only change the person telling the story, but also change the therapist who is privileged to be a part of this unfolding process. Third, listening with an open mind. All social constructionist theories place an emphasis on listening to clients without judgment or blame. Affirming and valuing them emphasizes that therapists can encourage their clients to consider um, absolute judgment by moving towards seeing both good and bad elements in situations. Narrative therapists make effort to enable clients to modify painful beliefs, values, and interpretations without imposing their value system and interpretation. Although narrative therapists bring to the therapy venture certain attitudes such as optimism, respectful, curiosity, and persistence, and a valuing for the client's knowledge. They are able to listen to the problem-saturated story of the client without getting stuck. As narrative therapists listen to the client's story, they stay alert for details that give evidence to the client's competence in taking stands against oppressive problems. During the narrative conversation, attention is given to avoiding totalizing language, which reduces the complexity of the individual by assigning an all-embracing single description to the essence of person. Therapists begin to separate the person from the problem in their mind as they listen and respond. The narrative perspective focuses on the capacity of humans for creative and imaginative thought. Narrative practitioners do not assume that they know more about the lives of clients than they do. Clients are the primary interpreter of their own experiences. People are viewed as active agents who are able to derive meaning out of their experiential world. Thus, the process of change can be facilitated but not directed by the therapist. So next is the therapeutic process. This brief overview of the steps in the narrative therapeutic process illustrates the structure of the narrative approach. The first step is collaborate with the client to cope with a mutually acceptable name for the problem. The second, personify the problem and attribute oppressive intentions and tactics to it. The third, investigate how the problem has begun disrupting, dominating, or discouraging to the client. Next, invite the client to see his or her story from a different perspective by offering alternative meanings for events. Next, discover moments when the client wasn't dominated or discouraged by the problem by searching for exemptions to the problem. Find historical evidence to bolster a new view of the client as competent enough to have stood up to, defeated, or escaped from the dominance or oppression of the problem. Ask the client to speculate about what kind of future could be expected from the strong, competent person that is emerging. As the client becomes free of problem-saturated stories of the past, he or she can envision and plan for a less problematic future. Next, find a creative audience for perceiving and supporting the new story. It is not enough to recite a new story. The client needs to live the new story outside of therapy. Because the person's problem initially developed in a social context, it is essential to involve the social environment in supporting the new life story that has emerged in the conversation. So, what are the therapy goals? A general goal of narrative therapy is to invite people to describe their experience in new and fresh language. In doing this, they open up new vistas of what is possible. Narrative practitioners seek to enlarge the perspective and focus and facilitate the discovery of creation of new options that are unique to the people they see. Therapist function and role. Narrative therapists are active facilitators. The concepts of care, interest, respectful, curiosity, openness, empathy, contact, and even fascination are seen as relational necessity. The not knowing position, which allows therapists to follow, affirm, and be guided by the stories of their clients, creates participant, observer, and process facilitator roles for the therapist and integrates therapy with a postmodern view of human inquiry. So, let's discuss the therapeutic relationship. Narrative therapists place great importance on the qualities a therapist brings to the therapy venture. Some of these attitudes include optimism and respect, curiosity and persistence, valuing the client's knowledge and creating a special kind of relationship characterized by a real power-sharing dialogue. Collaboration, compassion, reflection, and discovery characterize the therapeutic relationship. If this relationship is to be truly collaborated, the therapist need to be aware of how power manifests itself in his or her professional practice. This does not mean that the therapist does not have authority as a professional. He or she uses this authority, however, by treating clients as experts in their own lives. So the application, therapeutic techniques, and procedure. The effective application of narrative therapy is more dependent on therapist attitudes or perspective than on techniques. In the practice of narrative therapy, there is no recipe, no set of agenda, and no formula that the therapist can follow to assure a positive result. A narrative approach to counseling is more than the application of skills. It is based on the therapist's personal characteristics that create a climate that encourages clients to see their stories from different perspectives. The approach is also an expression of an ethical stance which is grounded in a philosophical framework. So what is question and more question? So in narrative therapy, narrative therapists use questions as a way to generate experience rather than to gather information. The aim of questioning is to progressively discover or construct the client's experience so that the therapist has a sense of what direction to pursue. Questions are always asked from a position of respect, curiosity, and openness. Therapists ask questions from a not knowing position, meaning that they do not pose questions that they think they already know the answer to. Whatever the purpose, the questions are often secular or relational, and they seek to empower clients in new way. Externalization and deconstruction. Externalization is the process for deconstructing the power of a narrative. This process separates the person from identification with the problem. When clients view themselves as being the problem, they are limited in the ways they can effectively deal with the problem. When clients experience the problem as being located outside of themselves, they create a relationship with the problem. Separating the problem from the individual facilitates hope and enable clients to take a stand against specific storylines such as self-blame. By understanding the cultural invitations to blame oneself, clients can deconstruct this storyline and generate a more positive, healing story. The search for unique outcomes. In the narrative approach, externalizing questions are followed by question searchings for unique outcomes. The therapist talks to the client about moments of choice or success regarding the problem. This is done by selecting for attention any experience that stands apart from the problem story, regardless of how insignificant might seem to the client. Alternative story and reauthoring. Constructing new stories goes hand in hand with the construction, and the narrative therapist listens for opening to new stories. People can continually and actively reauthor their lives, and narrative therapists invite clients to author alternative stories, saturated stories, or author alternative stories through unique outcomes, defined as events that are not predicted by the problem-saturated story. The therapist listens for clues to competence in the midst of problematic story and builds a story of competence around it. A turning point in the narrative interview comes when clients make the choice or whether to continue to live by a problem-saturated story or create an alternative story. Documenting the evidence. One technique for consolidating the gains a client makes is by writing letters. Narrative therapists have pioneered the development of therapeutic letter writing. These letters that the therapist writes provide a record of the session and may include an externalizing description of the problem and its influence on the client, as well as an account of the client's strengths and abilities that are identified in the session. Letters can be read again at different times, and the story that they are part of can be re-inspired. The letter highlights the struggle the client has had with the problem and draws distinction between problem-saturated story and the developing new and preferred story. Group work. Many of the techniques described in this chapter can be applied to group counseling. So, Winslade and Monk 2007 claimed that the narrative emphasis on creating an appreciative audience for new developments in an individual's life lends itself to group work. They state, groups provide a ready-made community of concern and many opportunities for the kind of interaction that opens possibilities for new ways of living. New identities can be rehearsed and tried out into a wider world. So, the postmodern approaches from a multicultural perspective. So, let's find out the strength and the shortcoming of postmodern approaches from a multicultural perspective. So, first, let's discuss strength from a diversity perspective. Postmodern approaches are good fit with diverse worldviews. Within the framework of their cultural values and worldview, clients can explore their belief and provide their own reinterpretation of significant life events. The practitioner with a social constructionist perspective can guide client in a manner that respects their underlying values. This dimension is especially important in those cases where counselors are from a different cultural background or do not share the same worldview as their clients. Narrative therapy is grounded in a sociocultural context, which make this approach especially relevant for counseling culturally diverse clients. Narrative therapists concentrate on problem stories that dominate and subjugate at the personal, social, and the cultural levels. And for the shortcoming from a diversity perspective, a potential shortcoming of the postmodern approaches pertains to the not knowing stance the therapist assume, along with the assumption of the client as expert. Individuals from many different cultural groups tend to evaluate professional as the expert who will offer direction and solutions for the person seeking help. If the therapist is telling the client, I am not really an expert, you are the expert. I trust in your resources for you to find solutions to your problems. Then this may engender lack of confidence in the therapist. To avoid this situation, the therapist using a solution focus or a narrative orientation needs to convey the client that he or she has expertise in the process of therapy, but clients are the expert in knowing what they want in their lives. So all in all, the postmodern approaches using narrative therapy really focuses on the clients, because in this therapy, the clients is they are the expert of their own stories, because the therapist duty is to bring out the story and to evaluate what is the reason of the client's problem based on the story that he tells, and based on that story the client will or the therapist will help the client to reauthor and remake another story that will help the client boost their confidence and to solve the problem they face in their lives. So that ends my report, and here is my references. Good day and thank you very much.